Okay. You're starting us off, right? Hi, everybody.
Yes, we are live. Hi, everybody. My name is Amanda Tosoff.
And my name is Jodi Proznick, and I'm in Vancouver, BC.
And I am in Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
And we are two-thirds of the Music Education Hub Music Arts Collective. The other one-third is our executive director, Francesca Fung, who is usually managing the chat, but she can't be with us here today. So we'll be keeping an eye on the chat ourselves and would love to answer any questions you may have or comments, respond to any comments as we move through this conversation today. So feel free to post questions, comments, and do tell us where you're tuning in from. We love, love, love to hear from you, and we love to know where you're all situated.
Yeah, absolutely. So perhaps some of you tuning in have checked out our conversations before our live streams, and perhaps some of you are joining us for the first time. So welcome and thanks for being here. This is, I think, lucky number 13 for our live streams that we've been doing since September, and we've had the pleasure of interviewing a bunch of wonderful special guests. Celine Peterson, we talked about Oscar Peterson and her beautiful life in music, and we had Claire Barlow, Lila Bialy, Sharantha Bedegay, my hero Rini Rosnes, and a whole bunch of other special guests. So if you haven't had a chance to check out those, they do live on our YouTube, so you can go there and subscribe. What else? We also have a new freebie out this morning, ready for today. We've been doing a freebie of the month resource that you can go check out for free. So this month is a 5 of our favorite 8-bar chord progressions that can get you help you get started when you're composing and creating harmonies. So you can go check that out on our site, musicartscollective.com. And what else do we have going on, Jodi? What's coming up?
Well, pretty exciting. This is a little taste today of what we're planning on doing next Sunday. So we hope you join us. This one you have to register for on our website. It's called Creativity Station, Getting Started with Jazz Composition. And what we're going to be exploring in this webinar are some strategies and tips to get you started, what we call provocations, creativity provocations, some templates on different chord progressions you can use and different ways of taking a melody and kind of playing around with it. We may even have a little chat about writing for text, writing with poetry. And the cool thing about these webinars is that they live in the hub, so you can revisit as you need. And also we will be putting together a beautiful PDF package with some fun tips and tricks for you as we that you can explore and use in your own creative world. So the whole point of these is to just inspire you to go have fun and paint with sound for a while and see what comes out, because Amanda and I have jumped into this world and we love it, and we want you to be invited into this world too of composition and creating songs. Very fun.
Yes, absolutely. So I think I will kick things off, Jodi, and start by asking you, what was your very first composition? Do you remember the inspiration behind it? And do you remember how it felt writing it and sharing it with other people for the first time?
Well, my story is a little bit interesting. In fact, sometimes I'm reluctant to say I'm a composer because I think we have this idea of composers as being like Mahler, or even for songwriters like Lennon and McCartney, and it's just genius right out of the gate. So interestingly enough, I didn't actually write my first song until I was in my late 20s. And I was hanging out with a group of musicians here in Vancouver, and we would gather like once a week and play and jam. And they said, let's bring in a tune a week. And I was like, I've never written a tune. And they just said, oh, who cares? Just write one and bring it in. We'll read through it. So I wrote a tune called Mora. And I was so nervous, Amanda. I thought, this is terrible and I don't know how to do this. And I'm almost embarrassed to share this right now. But luckily the gentleman we're playing with and jamming with, were just super generous and just hopped right in and gave it a go. And it was far less scary than I was imagining prior to actually putting it in front of them, feeling the judgment that isn't actually happening generally with musicians. It's usually happening in your own mind. The jerk sitting on your shoulder telling you you're not good enough and who do you think you are? But so I did it, and that was the first time. How about you?
Well, I think the first tune that I wrote was for my theory class in college. We're writing a modal jazz tune, and I actually would write a lot of ideas and solos actually out. So I was writing a lot before, but this is my first official tune that I crafted my whole melody and a form and everything. And it was such a great experience because, it was so magical to take this thing that I imagined and then put it on paper, give it to my band, and have it played and have it come alive. And I had no expectations of it at that time because it was really just an exercise for my theory class. And ended up, it was the start of my first band and really sparked that wanting to write more because it was such a great experience. But I will say that every single time I write a new song, I have that jerk on my shoulder who I have to, do this to get off. I think that it's pretty normal to be, nervous to share something, even now after having done it for so long. And, but it's always great if you surround yourself with people who, like you said, are generous and want to put their all into your music. So that was my first tune.
For sure. And also not be afraid to, sort of think like in a collaborative way. Like, for example, if you wrote a book, there's an expectation that there's an editor, right? An editor would read your book and edit your book. So when I would write something, if that I was coming up against a challenge, or I would always have a couple of people look over my work and be open to suggestions always. And that I find feels very empowering to, then it's not just about me. It does feel collaborative, and you get the help from people who maybe have a bit more experience to kind of look over your work and pick up on anything that's like, oh, that's a bit weird there. So I tend to rely on the musicians I play with too to workshop stuff.
Yes.
And luckily I'm married to my piano player, so that makes things very, very handy.
Yes.
And it's been wonderful with just, offering, oh, you might want to change this to a minor 7 chord here, or that melody is a bit awkward or whatever. So yeah.
And then, of course, you can always go, that was a great suggestion, but I'm going to stick with what I did.
Yeah, 100%. Of course,
or taking that wonderful feedback
100%.
So,
well, when I was working with lyrics, I worked with a friend, a wonderful writer, like one of Canada's best lyricists, Sherry Ulrich. I sent her my lyrics and said, would you, had her look over them, and she did make some suggestions that I didn't use. I was like, no, I'm gonna kind of stick with the original thing, and she, that was fine with that. That's the beauty of it, of getting
back
feedback.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So it's interesting right now. I wanted to just mention one little thing about today, because of course it's Easter weekend. So a big happy Easter to everybody who's joining us who celebrates Easter. And for those that don't, happy spring to you. And it just feels really poetic that we're talking about creativity and the creative process, because I always find the spring is sort of, it's all about the rebirth. It's all about the blooming of the new. And it's about, tapping into this idea of things, laying dormant or within you, and then all of a sudden stuff starts coming out and the creativity starts coming out. So I just want to honor this weekend and honor that energy of creativity that is the earth gives us every year, this renewal energy. So I just want to tap into that as well and honor that this is Easter Sunday for everybody today. So I also want to chat a little bit, mention, and maybe Amanda, you can talk about this too, that before I started actually doing the writing, I kind of had this romanticized idea about like composers, right? And looking back, I realized that was something that we're kind of given, this idea that there are these genius musicians that are those creative geniuses that make this creative genius art. And it kind of ignores the sweat and the labor and the hard work, and also the access to information or access to other people who can do that editing process and creativity. So do you want to talk about a little bit about that? Like, how did you address that notion of, creatives being these romantic, flash of insight, genius folk, and get past it, that narrative?
Yeah. Well, I think for the longest time, I actually thought I was not very creative because I never had like that flash of inspiration, like a song coming to me and then it just flows out. And I had some friends who were kind of like that. They would get an idea and have to no, they would just come to them, it seemed. And for me, I had to sit at the piano and work. I know it doesn't sound like much fun, but it is. I had to actually sit down and give myself sort of some limitations within which to get started. It might be, I wonder if I could write a tune based on this song, or maybe I can play with this voicing or this harmony that I've stolen from this song and see if I can create something. But nothing just came to me. I had to sort of get started in order for things to get started. So yeah, for me, I realized that my process, and probably a lot of people's process, really is it's hard work. It's fun and great work. And once you're in the flow of working on something, it feels like that magical, inspired moment. But I think for me, I came to terms with that it doesn't just come to you. You don't have to wait. You don't wait for the inspiration. Just get started, and things will flow, and you'll build something. So for me, that's how I kind of got over it. After a certain time, I realized that's just my process, and it's maybe not realistic to just expect it to just come out of thin air. You have to make it.
Right. I mean, I think creativity is a daily practice. It's like,
Yes.
it's imagination is a muscle, right?
Yeah.
And
Love that.
I love the quote that talent is skill plus confidence. Both can be cultivated over time, and that imagination, and being able to dwell in possibilities and be a professional wanderer.
Yes.
Also,
I love that.
my friend Lynn Fells at SFU calls it the pedagogy of noticing. Like, you are constantly, when you sort of open yourself up to the possibilities that everything is potential raw material, and not just the sounds you hear, but like your whole life, everything you're experiencing in the day. There's a common conversation around composers where, in fact, we had this with Rini the other day, where she talked about being inspired by birds or being inspired by, I know Christine talks about being inspired by the West Coast of Canada, and like the Christine Jensen I'm talking about. People find inspiration in their lived experience, and then we're basically translating that into sound. And no one ever really talked to me about that. I never really wasn't around people that were having those conversations. So for me, it's interesting how when you kind of practice this every day, like being in this state of if, like, I'm going to have my food and sleep and I'm going to make something. And then actually Kenny Wheeler talked about it too. He used to wake up in the morning and he used to go straight to the piano and like kind of create for 3 hours. And sometimes stuff would come out that was great and sometimes not. And that's the other thing, is the more you do it, you become less attached to the outcome of it, because you're just documenting your creative process, and then sometimes things start to codify or pin down, and you start repeating things and you're like, okay, this is my thing. Or you say, like, I remember one of my tunes on the album, it was literally like, I'm going to explore pivot chords. And I just sat and just went, oh, I can go there and there, wrote down the chord progression, wrote a melody on it. It took and it was ultimately kind of an exercise, but I really liked the progression I came up with. So add an intro, add an ending, boom, tune. So that one came kind of fast, because I used, was like, I'm going to explore this theory concept and write from there. And sometimes you're like, well, I heard a bird call and that's inspiring me. So how about you? Does any of that resonate with you?
I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think for me, one of the big things that I've learned over the years is that when I start writing something, you might not be in love with it right away. You just have to sort of trust that you will either keep working on it and will turn into something you like, or you'll throw it away. That's possible too. But I think early on I would start writing something and go, oh, this sucks. Like I would be really, I would throw it away before I'd even like had time to develop it. And I realized that oftentimes it takes a while. It takes sometimes getting it, like hearing it played by your band before you actually go, yeah, I like this song and I want to do something with it. And it's like you're just constantly editing and constantly listening, giving feedback, and over time you might build something that you like. So I think just trusting, just keep going, I guess, is the main thing. And I also really love creating exercises for myself because it takes the pressure off. So what you're saying about, hey, I'm going to take this little theory concept. I wonder what it would sound like if I take this and I write something with that. I pretty much every song where I've written something new, something that I hadn't written before, and something that I really liked actually stemmed from taking a little kernel of an idea from somewhere else and then going, what if I do this? And even the songs we're going to look at today, I think that for me, it started with an exercise of taking a poem and just saying, hey, I wonder what it would be like if I took someone else's beautiful piece of art and tried to capture the mood and tried to create my own melody with that as the lyric. And that spawned a whole project. And so for me, exercises are the way I start everything. It never just comes to me. I have to sort of give myself something to sort of get started. And then the pressure's off to create something amazing too, because it's an exercise.
Yeah.
So that's huge for me.
It's just exploration. It's like being more of a scientist than the science project. Like, so like my son always talks, he's in an inquiry project school, and they talk about you are, focus on the experiment. And so, and sometimes experiments don't work out, but you'll learn a lot by just exploring and getting curious and curiosity. Yeah. And the thing that stops us from diving into to remaining in curious energy in terms of creating art, I think it's just these narratives about, well, only special people make stuff and who am I? And the thing that I think I can speak to, and I'm sure Amanda agrees with me, is that the cool thing about living a longer life is you all of a sudden can look back and you go, wow, I've changed and grown, and I'm still learning, and I'm still like trying new things, experiencing new things, and learning new things. And you become less bogged down by thinking you have to know everything to even get started. You just don't. You don't have to climb the whole music mountain to get started. And as you were saying, I think these provocations or these exercises are wonderful ways to just get things flowing. It's like having a journal with some questions to provoke writing, or I think and in a lot of other art forms, there's a little bit more of this. I find like art teachers will have these exercises to just get explore this shape, or and with music we don't always think of it that way, because I think music is particularly amazing at being romanticizing the talented people, and everyone else are just little pawn, like we're just nothing. I'm nothing next to whomever, whether it's John Coltrane or Beethoven, which they are amazing. Don't get me wrong, but I want to be inspired by them. Like, oh, I want to create like they do, rather than feel like, well, I'm not even going to bother because I'm not going to do that. So so it's flipping that so that you feel like you can. Absolutely. You really can. If we can, you can.
Oh yeah,
thing, right?
I've never felt like I know what I'm doing. No, I just go with my gut, and I explore things, and it
doesn't get any better.
Yeah. Exactly.
I just become less. I'm too tired to care as much. I'm just like, well,
absolutely.
Here it is, folks.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think that it's a process. And everyone has an individual voice, and I really think and there's no one way to do something too. Sometimes I've written something and, it goes against a tradition or a rule in music theory, and that's okay, because really there are no rules. But anyway, more on that another time. Shall we get started with talking about a couple of our tunes and sort of the process and the ideas behind them? And okay.
Yes, well, we're going to start with Amanda's tune. So I'm going to just pontificate and be a cheerleader for a minute. So first of all, if you're listening, go find Earth Voices on actually go to SoundCloud and buy Earth Voices from Bandcamp. Yes, sorry, whichever. Or you can go to her website directly and buy a hard copy, which is also awesome to do. But we're going to talk about one of the songs from this absolutely beautiful album. It's one of those albums that, there's a lot of music coming out these days. I keep putting it on over and over and over and over again. I'm learning, the melodies are just sticking with me in my mind. I wake up in the morning and I'm like singing these melodies. So Amanda is a brilliant example of how you can amalgamate all these amazing pieces of a puzzle into one collective whole. The album is full of, well, first of all, the musicians are top notch, like some of Canada's best. Her partner, David, did an incredible job mixing and mastering. So it's a beautiful sound. It's like a warm embrace. And then the writing itself, the lyrics, the choice, the whole arc of the album, I think is just an incredible work of art. It's like walking into an art gallery and just seeing a collection that you're just like, oh, wow, I'm transported right now. So except it's sonic. So I'm so excited to talk to you about it. I want to talk to you about your album the whole time, but Amanda insisted we have to do one of mine, so we will. But yes. But what's interesting about when I was listening was how, it was touching me. There were certain aesthetic choices you were making that I resonated with me as a listener and as a creative as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So maybe we can, shall I pull up the piece of poetry, or maybe you can just talk about the song we're going to listen to a little bit, and then we'll take a look at the poetry.
Yeah. Well, actually, it would be good to share that.
Sure.
If you don't mind. And I will just say, you said all that you should be my manager, Jodi. Jeez. And I can say all the same things about Jodi's music.
Whatever.
We actually have some very, we have some very similar things that we like to do. And it's really interesting when we were preparing for this, to notice those similarities and ways of thinking, which is, I'm really excited to look at her beautiful song, Listen, which also gets in my head in a really good way. Good way. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, here it comes.
Fantastic. And while you're setting that up, we are streaming today from a different setup, so we actually can't see the chat. I just realized. So hopefully, maybe Jodi, while I'm chatting, if you want to look at anyone's questions and just see.
Sure.
And we'll hopefully, if we don't address them in the chat here or in the live stream, we'll definitely go and check out the chat later.
Okay, so
there is something in front of the.
Oh, is it gone now?
Actually. No, now it's gone.
Great.
Amazing. Thanks so much for setting that up, Jodi.
Got it.
Okay, so what we wanted to talk about today was really like how we got started with these particular songs that we've chosen. And this is from my latest CD that Jodi mentioned, and it's the concept of the album and also my last album is that I've taken poems, pre-existing poems by a whole variety of poets, and set them to music. And it's been something I've really enjoyed doing these last number of years because it's really deepened my compositional approach, and I just find it so amazing to just sit and sing something, even though I'm not a singer. Oh, Jodi, you might want to actually mute yourself.
Sorry, I'm muting
myself.
There we go.
I don't want to hear myself twice. No,
there were no questions. I just a lot of singing praises for your album, so that's fantastic. Okay.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
So let's go back.
Well, now the pressure's on to really talk about. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to talk about a poem called Feeny, which is by a Canadian poet from the 1800s named Marjorie Pickthall, and when I was looking for poems to use, I'm actually not a poetry buff. I don't know anything about poetry. I just was looking for, again, it was an exercise. I wanted to find something to, write a melody to. And so I've become much more interested in poetry. And what I like about it is that you can experience it in the same way you experience music. You don't have to know all about it to have a reaction to it. And so for me, this coming across this poem, I just love the simplicity of it. I love the imagery. I love the feeling in it. And I'll talk about that as I sort of get into how I approach writing music to it.
So do you want me to move up or?
Not quite yet, actually. Okay. So first of all, one of the things I do first when I find a poem that just I have a reaction to and I think might suit my music, which often does have a lot of imagery of nature and actually also death, but more of an appreciation of life, really. So I just ponder the poem to get started. So I look for things like, is there a built-in phrasing? There often is. Traditional poems that rhyme too are, lend themselves well to music. I've also written songs to poems that don't have any kind of structure, maybe more contemporary poems. But I look for a built-in phrasing structure. This one has a really set form, like really set. So it's 3 stanzas. Each line is starting with the same word. Even the lengths of everything is just very set and built in. So in a way, you would think that would be easy to set music to. I'll talk about in a second how it actually wasn't. I had to sort of get a little creative with thinking about ways to develop it because it was so formulaic, but more on that in a second. So I look for the structure and just the rhythm of the line as I say it. And then the next thing I look for are there any words that stand out or images where I feel like I could have some fun word painting or capturing that image in sound? And so things like the word falling, I wonder if I could have my gesture have a bit of a falling, gesture, or the word sorrow. Maybe I can capture a chord that's a little, has a little bit of sorrow in it, or the word hill, thinking about maybe a gesture that climbs a hill, and that can get really cheesy potentially if you do it with too obvious. But again, I like to think about possibilities and then see if it works or if it doesn't. I also look for imagery, like what's happening in each of these stanzas. Is there sort of a feeling that I want to capture? Like for example, in the first stanza, there's the mellow flower, elm bough falling, lonely grass, and birds calling. I mean, it's a sunny spring day. Like, how can I capture that in the music? So I look for those sorts of ideas. I also look for, there might be, yeah, perfect. So I also look for, is there a mood or a transformation in the mood or the story? And even like, is there a sense of motion in the poetry? And for me, this one's an interesting one because it's so simple in the way it's constructed, but I love the way there's different kinds of motion that I do play around with in the song. And one of those is this sense of time. So over the course of the poem here, we have, give me a few hours to pass. The next stanza, give me a few more days to keep. And then the last one, give me a few more years to fill. And there's, this sort of motion towards the end. And, made me think about aging and how as we age, time seems to go faster. And so maybe that's an idea I can play around with. And I do, because I thought that would be fun. There's also this feeling of an ascent when you kind of ponder the poem. We're here on Earth where the birds and the grass and the flowers are. And then there's talk of the skies in the nighttime and then into the stars. So there's this kind of feeling of we're on Earth, we're in the sky, we're in the heavens. And so again, those are just creative ideas that might spark some things I can play around with in the music. So that's where I start. It's just pondering all the things that come to mind about the poem, things I can play around with in the music. So the next thing I do, once I kind of just ponder those things, get some ideas started, I set the scene. So the beginning of the poem is very mellow. It's springtime, it's sunny. So how can I capture that in music? Maybe a major chord? And this like pulsating spring is sort of pulsating, I don't know. Maybe I'll add a tinge of sadness just because it is a sad topic. reaching the end of life. But I'm setting up this sort of calm, a little nostalgic sort of vibe to set the scene. So I always find a harmonic accompaniment to get me started. And then I just sing, even now without lyrics, I still try to sing my melody first. So I'm not stuck to what I don't get confined to what I would know in my fingers. I really trust what comes out. And so I would, in the privacy of my own home, and now I'm doing this online, because the beautiful singer Emily Claire Barlow sings this song, and we'll listen to her sing it. But again, I just kind of sang an idea, and it ended up being this simple idea off the top. So, I set up my vibe. And then when I'm ready to come in with the first phrase, I sort of improvised and worked out the first line, which goes something like this. Pardon my singing. Give me a few more days to give me a few more hours to pass. And so once I come up with that little idea, everything else sort of fell into place. And so what I always do when I'm working on a tune is make sure that I have a strong opening idea that I'm in love with. Mm-hmm. And then everything else just falls into place. So from there, I created a question answer structure for the second line. I repeated the first idea again to match the rhyming scheme. And then from there, it just unfolded. And so that's like the start of pretty much every piece I work on. I make sure I spend a lot of time on that opening idea to make sure it works for me. And so I think let's have a listen. What I'll set up, I mentioned earlier that because of the structure of this poem, it was actually really difficult to make it go somewhere in this course of the poem, the three stanzas. So I actually had to play with some other things to make it not feel repetitive. So we have this you'll hear like one idea basically repeated, the melody very repetitive, and the harmony just kind of stays on that B flat world landscape for quite a while. And then from there, to create some variation, I'm varying the melody just a little. I have one little chord that sneaks in for a slight variation. And then from there, I tried to think about the overall course of the song. That was how I was able to build it. So you'll hear a piano and vocal solo that builds in energy towards the climax, and then there's a change in the emotion as the poem gets restated. So if we actually flip to the next slide, I just kind of put a little graphic together that kind of shows what's happening in this song. So it's so repetitive. So how am I balancing that out? Well, I'm having phrases that have more space between them to start off the piece. I gradually am making them closer together to sort of mimic this feeling of, time is starting to move faster towards the end. And there's also this feeling of ascent that I mentioned that I wanted to play around with. So you'll hear the poem stated, everything's gradually getting shorter. You'll hear a vocal piano solo building in energy, and then you'll hear the poem restated with new harmony that kind of amps up the emotion. Mm-hmm. And there's this gradual ascent to the guitar solo, which is really the peak of the song. So it has a different kind of form than a lot of traditional jazz songs, and I hope that you'll enjoy it. So,
shall we have a listen?
Yes, please.
All right. Here we go, friends. This is
Fini. Words by Marjorie Pickthall. Emily Claire Barlow on voice, and Alex Goodman on guitar, John Maharaj on bass, Morgan Childs on drums. Beautiful musicians.
Okay, hold on. I'm just gonna bring this back to the front.
So here's that setting of the scene, right? Just it's like a hug.
Oh, sorry. There's a big black.
That's okay. Go on to the next slide, actually.
Give me a few more hours to pass.
Some more space here.
With the mellow flower of the elm bough falling. And I know more than the lonely grass.
Needs to go somewhere new, right?
And the birds calling. Give me a few more
just
the clear
the change in feel too
Yes.
in the drums creates
They
a new
shape it
texture.
so beautifully.
So beautiful.
So you hear the phrases closer together now.
Gets a little more excited, a little more energy. It's building to the solo.
And then the night on a starry hill,
Actually, don't go up there.
and the road's ending, and the road's ending.
So this doesn't really like stand alone. It needs to kind of still build and go somewhere. So now here's the vocal piano solo, which we'll eventually get there. By the way, this is a really hard solo. Emily Claire nails it. There's like a winding up of energy. So now here's the poem's going to be restated with this new harmony that's gradually going to get closer and closer together. You'll hear this.
Give me a few more hours to pass.
The ascending chords,
Mellow flower of the elm bough falling.
a higher,
No
higher,
more than
climbing the stair,
lonely grass.
heading to heaven.
Birds calling. Give me a few more days to keep with a little love and a little sorrow. And then the dawn and the skies of sleep and a clear tomorrow.
It's busier.
Give me a few more years to fill with a little work and a little ending. And then the night on a starry hill and the road's ending.
And here's where it winds up to really get to the climax
Give
of
me a
the
few
piece.
more hours to pass. Give me a few more days to keep. Give me a few more hours to pass. Give me a few more days to keep.
It's Alex Goodman on guitar.
Oh, so good.
And it's fun because it's there's a sadness. Obviously, death is sad. It's obviously, but there's also, I think, in the poem a sense of kind of appreciation for everything life has had to offer. So that was sort of what I was trying to capture in that sort of longing for more, and at the end, sort of just a sense of peace. So really simple. Really, like the melody's there's not that much to it, but it's like you can really have some fun with shape and thinking about form and expanding upon that, and that's part of the fun of that one. So thanks for letting me share.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so much I want to unpack here. So beautiful. So First of all, I love the way you played around with each phrase having space or less space. So, like at that last verse before you head into the vocal piano solo, the way you truncate the space between each line just creates this. It's such a simple thing to do, but it just creates this momentum. It's like this churning towards. And so the way it just keeps lifting and lifting. And then at the end, how beautifully you start to have that ascending bass line, which is like my favorite thing ever, being a bass player. It's like this.
And it's just a B flat major scale.
Exactly. It's just, I know, right? But that beauty in having this diatonic melody and all of the tension and all of the movement moves into the bass. It feels so grounded. It's so amazing. And then, of course, the coda, so to speak, is the guitar solo where it sort of opens up into this. It's almost like like again, the metaphor of the cocoon and the butterfly like emerging, and then that's almost like the butterfly getting free or the soul being released. It's such a beautifully crafted story where where all of your musical choices are serving the painting of the words. So it's such a beautifully crafted piece. That also isn't just about the craft. I mean, there's so much emotion in it. I mean, I think that's the thing that is so beautiful about. And also, I love just knowing your background and that you love to, you used to love to write out your solos and craft solos for yourself, that you did that for this piece, right? You were like pulling this thing you've been doing for a long time and then getting to play it live with Emily Claire, play it in the studio. It's such a beautiful texture, right?
And it's one thing I love doing with her and her band is playing a solo together. It's always really fun.
And she just nailed it. It's just so beautiful. So beautiful.
Absolutely. I should acknowledge this amazing band again, because really they shaped this to make it come to life. So again, that's like Emily Claire Barlow on voice, Alex Goodman on guitar, John Maharaj on bass, and Morgan Childs on drums. And they just did such a beautiful job.
There's something to be said too. I think Phil Dwyer, who we hope to have on this podcast at some point, or this webinar, talked about curating your life well and curating your art well. So being brave enough to ask the people that you want to realize your music to do it, and people who are going to invest wholeheartedly into the art. And it's even so beautiful, Morgan's choice to go into that kind of halftime feel at the end of And a Clear Tomorrow. It's like all of a sudden you're like walking through the forest. It has this whole other texture, so subtle but so, what a great little choice, right? To paint with the song. It's amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And those that don't necessarily, those of you who are not, on the bandstand all the time, wouldn't know that that's what happened. I'm assuming Morgan just sort of did that. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, we've been playing this song a lot over the years. It's been in our repertoire for a while, and it really developed just through playing. And I think, again, like you said, these musicians really have invested so much time and love into the music, so it really comes through. But yeah, I think that was probably more naturally, that's what felt natural for him to do in the moment, and it was beautiful.
We have a question here, Amanda. How much of the arrangement did you write versus have your musicians create the feel? For example, we just talked about the drummer's choice. So can you talk a little bit about how much is notated out and how much is just left to. I think I lost you. Sorry, can you?
Yeah. So how much is written, how much is more improvised or just interpreted? This particular song was more of a lead sheet style arrangement. My other tunes on the record have a few more moving parts, so they were maybe more notated for some of the arrangements, like string parts and like guitar and piano parts. But this one, it had a chord progression with some hits for the band, so more of a lead sheet style. And the melody I did plan out quite a bit. Of course, Emily Claire put a little bit of her own stamp on the melody in a beautiful way. But this one was a bit more of a lead sheet style, more of a traditional jazz arrangement. Of course, I wrote out the bass line that I'm playing with John on the head out. And I did work out some of what I wanted to do for the recording in my comping. So I might not have written it out, but I would have worked out some elements of it. But yeah, some of my other pieces are like completely written out, and then others it's like a chord progression and a melody, and you're using all of your past skill to sort of compose on them in the moment, I suppose. Yeah, so most of that was a chord progression and some select moments of written notation.
I think to answer that question, Christian, I think you have to know who you're writing for. You know, certain musicians, you know, the more you can give them like dynamics, articulation, like the whole thing, the better.
Right.
But when I think Amanda and I both work with musicians that we know and trust and have played with a long time. And so you don't have to do maybe as much info. Plus, I think with jazz, the aesthetic really is like bring your best self to the music. And one of the fun is hearing how other people interpret your music. And if a song is solid, it's going to sound great. If you've given there's just enough info to make it sound the way it needs to sound without over dictating what you want. And this is specific to jazz composition. I just worked with classical musicians. That's a whole other kettle of fish, right? But with jazz musicians, we tend to, I think, infer choices and yeah.
I think it depends too on the instrumentation, like and just what's going on. So if I've there's another tune, Luciana Souza tune that I wrote an arrangement for that is pretty much exactly played as written, because there's so many moving parts and intersecting rhythmic stuff happening. And so and more instruments. So in that case, it's a little more notated. But so if you're writing for multiple horns playing at once, maybe that needs to be a bit more specific, unless you want it to be loose and just sort of interpreted. But
great questions. There was another question I'm gonna ask you. So it says, how do you deal with unfinished pieces of music? Maybe you started writing something, but then you were unable to finish because you feel like it's coming from an imposter place.
Like a feeling of not like you're an imposter. So the imposter syndrome. You mean?
Imposter syndrome. I would imagine. Yeah.
Do you want to answer that, Jodi?
Yeah, well, you start. I'm gonna.
I mean, I think I mentioned that earlier, that every time I would start a piece, even a little bit of that is lingered. But in the past, I would definitely go, "Oh, I don't know what I'm doing. This isn't very good," and I would just, that was unhealthy. They kind of stopped the creative process. So I think really trying to not go there is easier said than done. But I think also allowing space between. I would write something and go, I don't know if this is any good, or I don't know if this is, I'm going to just shelve it for now and I'll come back to it. And I actually would find I would come back and then finish it off and make it, whatever wasn't working in the moment, it would, either I would shelve it completely, or I would actually work when I came back to it. So I think giving space, I think that goes for making recordings or anything too. When you're in the thick of it, it's hard to have an objective opinion about what you're writing. So sometimes leaving some space, you come back to it, you might actually like it more than you did when you were first writing it. But
absolutely.
But I think we all feel a little bit of that imposter syndrome, and just, I don't know, the more that I do this, the more I realize just go with your gut. Trust your instincts, and just keep learning and keep exploring, because I think that I don't know anything about poetry. Like I'm just doing whatever I want to do. Just do your thing.
I think you answered that beautifully. I imagine, I say this to students all the time, especially in the life in music, that you have a big basket, and maybe you're in school, maybe you're out of school, maybe you're wherever you're at in your development, you have a big basket, and you're constantly going to be finding things and throwing them in your basket, including ideas or half-written songs, or and that basket's with you. It's full of information, experiences, ideas, and every once in a while you may reach in and be, oh yeah, this thing, right, and then you may be ready to work with it. All of that stuff, all that inspiration is just, it's like hunting and gathering. So don't attach too much to it, and also don't throw anything away. I sing a lot in my phone. If I'm like riffing on the piano, I've been using GarageBand over the pandemic and just doing stuff in there. Some of you will never ever hear some of that stuff. Some of it is quite funny, me rocking out on C minor on electric bass, but whatever. But yeah, so that's what I would say is again, if you think of yourself more like a scientist and living in that state of noticing things and a gathering, you're less attached to outcome with that thing, I think to de-romanticize it all and just be a little bit more pragmatic about it, and like, I need to make stuff because that's what I do. So I'm going to make stuff, and some of it's going to be great, some of it's not. But it doesn't matter because it's good to do. So
I think that I want to just comment on that idea of not being attached to something. I think that's so important, and I think for me these days, I tend not to write things down until I have a very set idea of what I want to do, because I find that if I start writing something down, it becomes a thing that's unchangeable. You can change it. It's just harder than if I'm sort of making recordings and I'm modifying it. And sometimes I'll get to something that I'm having trouble finishing, and I'll have to just go, well, maybe I need to go back to the drawing board and start that again. I like the opening idea, but it's just not going to where it needs to go. So I'll go back and just completely change the harmony or something. So I think that not thinking, okay, I've done half of it, now I need to finish it. Sometimes you need to go back and just start over, or take one idea that you had, like maybe it's somewhere, some other part of the song later on, a contrasting idea that you're like, that's cool, I'm going to take that and write a piece with that. So I think just being open-minded about, it doesn't have to be, in a logical order that you write it, or it doesn't have to be finished. It might generate something new.
Yeah, or may never be finished. There was a really great question from Emily Claire asked, did you record yourself improvising a solo, choose things you liked, and then build on that compositionally? So just to know a little insight on how you crafted that. I could just quickly say that I do that all the time. Like, I record myself improvising because my improvisational spirit is the best place for creativity. How about you, Amanda? Like, for that, did you record like an improv and then pull stuff?
The vocal solo, yeah. That took me a long time to write. Actually, I was really trying to make it feel like it was a solo, improvised, but also that building towards the climax. So it was really thought out, and I think I started off by probably listening to sort of demos that I had done with the band and sort of coming up with the opening idea. Like, I had that in mind, and then from there it was kind of improv, and then going back, okay, what else could I do, and then writing a draft and then editing for a long time. So I guess it started off with the kernel of the idea that starts it was improvised, but the entire thing was really crafted. And I was really trying to actually go outside of what I normally would play too. Like, some of those ideas I never had improvised in that way. Like, I really was trying to compose something new. And by the way, Emily Claire, you sang your butt off on that solo. It's not easy to play on the piano.
Boy, though you guys make it sound easy. Like, it just was like just flowing, just effortless, which is the magic of it all, right? But there's a lot of practice that goes into being able to flow like that. So good. Yeah. Fantastic. I don't know if, like, we're getting close to noon, so maybe we should just leave it with your stuff.
No, I want to hear. I want to hear. Listen, I can't see the chat, so I can't take a vote, but I guess that people are being like, we want listen. Oh, yeah. They're cheering you on. I would love to hear this piece and hear just again where you got the idea and how you developed it. It gets in my head. It's something about the use of repetition yet variation, just the message in the lyrics. It's just so, it touches me, and all the same ways. Basically everything you said about me the same way. I would love to hear the inspiration behind it.
Well, maybe I'll just do a little quick synopsis.
Oh, yes,
because I think really touched on a lot of really important ideas that I would reiterate.
I think there's a lot of similarities too. And the interesting thing about looking at both these pieces, there's some similar harmonic things, similar approaches to melody, I think.
Yeah.
Even some imagery of nature in both of these songs.
Yes. Okay, so let me just... Oh, yeah. So, wait a second. All of a sudden I'm...
So
continuing
pretty.
to scroll.
Those photos.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I thought it was interesting to pull up these photos because, for me, this whole project was an assimilation of a whole bunch of different ways of tying all the art together, all the influences or all the emotion together. And this particular song, Listen, the lyrics I wrote at the edge of the river, which we live in Vancouver, in Port Coquitlam, right along the Fraser River. It's, literally like a 1-minute walk across the street. And we have a lovely little riverside beach to sort of sit at and hang out at. And it's a very active river. There's a lot of tugboats and, logging logs and, barges and everything going up and down the river. So anyway, so basically the lyric I wrote in my journal, and I was doing a lot of journaling at the time, again, with no real intention of actually using any of this for an album, because I'm a jazz bass player and not a vocalist. So, I had these words and they were kind of writing them just for me, just again, like this. It was one of the things that was making me feel good as I was dealing with a whole bunch of stuff in life, being a mom and also, helping to care for my mom, who was quite ill at the time. So I would just head to the journal if I couldn't get to the bass or the piano and write. So these lyrics came from the water's edge. And I, when it came time to start to prep for the record, I actually had, it's funny because I had actually went to my husband Tilden and said, hey, do you want to co-write a song with me? Because I wrote these lyrics and it would be interesting. And he was like, no. He said, no. He said, go fly, little birdie. He's go write your song. He was like, go write your song. I'm like, okay. So I went down to the piano and I just started, again, like your songs, Amanda, I find that they make sense. Like when you're hearing the lyrics, there's the melodies are almost like melody versions of, as if you would speak this as a piece of poetry, So in this sense, the words, listen, listen, listen to the river, listen, listen, listen to the wind. Listen, listen, listen for the whispers of the morning, the wondrous day begins. That's how I would say it if I were speaking it as a piece of poetry. And so, listen, listen, listen to the river, and then some space, listen, listen, listen to the wind. I just sat at the piano and literally the melody sort of just came from me speaking the lyric. And then so it was a pretty organic process to find the melody for this. And initially I thought it might have been just in 3, but it just felt like it wanted this extra space after river. So it was interesting because I wrote the whole song and I had I could sit down and play the entire thing myself. And I, with the chords and everything, and I didn't really know what I was playing. Like I didn't notate a thing, nothing. Like I just sat down and wrote it. And then I kept going back to the piano and kept coming out the same way. And I was like, okay, I think I wrote a song. And then I went to notate it and I was like, holy crap. And then I looked at it and I was like, oh, it's 3 bars of 3 and 2 bars of 5. Oh, and oh, wow, these chord changes are like kind of to look at. They're a bit wacky, they're not easy to navigate, other than the fact that, like your song, this is basically G major, basically.
I love diatonic chords.
Yeah, except with the odd, borrowing from some minor tonality, or like, borrowing from the key of 4 with the F major 7 sharp 11. And and it was really all about the bass line, this. Right? So that, to me, if you have a nice melody in the bass and then a nice melody on top, you have a song, and then you just sort of fill in and then I also love that the force. So it's basically the same voicing with the moving bass line. So, Amanda, did you want to say something? I heard you.
Oh, I was just going to say that's almost exactly what I'm doing in the head out of the song we just listened to. Doing a very similar thing. Anyway, I just find that's so fun.
There you are. There, I couldn't hear you. Sorry, can you repeat what you said?
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I was just gonna say that the head out of the Feeney that we just listened to, I'm doing the exact same thing.
Yes.
And yet it's different though. It's interesting. It's almost the exact same thing, but it's different.
You keep going.
Right. Yes. Anyway, so beautiful idea, Jodi.
You could go. You can keep going.
Yeah. But the effect of stopping and pausing is so beautiful. Anyway, didn't mean to interrupt. So gorgeous.
No, please interrupt. I love it. This is like fun. People are getting an inside scoop of what we do in our spare time. So, so again, it was super fun. It's interesting because, like, again, when I sat down and right, it's 5 4 5 1 2 3 4 5. Right, it's it looked a lot more complicated than it sounds, which is interesting, And then this, the world is alive, hear her calling. Rain is falling, similar to you. I wanted it to feel the wondrous day begins, and that word begins is like, and then what? The world is alive, hear her calling. It's sort of this pushing into that idea at the end of the verse, so to speak. And this is kind of like a chorus. The world is alive, hear her calling. The world is alive, rain is falling. The world is alive, day is dawning. Living in this world as if it were home. And I have to shout out to I also love sixths. It's just, to me, it's just like, oh, I love that interval. And that sweeping interval, living in the world as if it were home. And that melody is actually, the first little bit is from Annie. Maybe far away or maybe real nearby, from my childhood. I always loved that opening line in that song when I was little girl. I just, again, it's like hunting and gathering. You have these experiences through your life. And then, you put them in your basket, these hooks, these songs, these melodies that speak to you, that speak to your heart. And then all of a sudden they come out. And I didn't even realize I had done that until I was like, oh my gosh, that's from maybe far away or maybe real nearby. I mean, it's just early childhood, like 5 or 6 when I went to the movie with my grandma. The first movie I ever saw, so it was back in there in the vault and it came out. And also I read this beautiful book called Living in the World as If It Were Home. And it's all about, really being present on the planet and really tuning in to nature and what nature is telling you. So it kind of ties into the theme of the song a little bit as well. So, yeah. And, so what else can I share about this? The forest in the sky. So yeah, I mean the song is about listening out to what's happening around you, but also listening. And the second verse is listening to your own body. So it's first about listening to the river, and then listen to your own breathing, listening to your cry, listening for the stirring within you. But then that stirring is this idea that there's also stirring in the sky, in the forest. So all of that idea of energy moving and moving through you, and storms coming and going, and the wind comes and goes, was mirroring, what I was going on in my life at the time. And I wanted to have a song that just sort of talked about that and had that feeling of like energy moving and flying through the air, and energy lifting out, and how nature is all about that energy moving and shifting and changing. And then your body is always moving and shifting and changing. Your emotions are always moving, shifting and changing. So, and at the very, very end here, when this is the lift off, with Lila sings so beautifully. Again, I love these big leaps, dramas. And then it's climbing up, and then she goes up to that high D, and that's when you're like jumping off the cliff off into the sky, right? Like you're hang gliding, or the bird flies off into the. And of course, I live in BC, so I was imagining, the bird flying through the mountains and over the ocean, and that freedom when you finally kind of work through something internally, and then it releases out. And it has that feeling of, it's gone. It's released into the sky. So yeah, that's sort of what was going on with the lyric and what I was trying to do with the emotion, and making these choices to leave space after each line. Listen, using repetition. It's a call. It's like a call to listen, so that's why I kept. And originally I called the song Home, living in the world as if it were home. And it was Sherry who worked on this with me, helped me sort of fine tune the lyrics. She said, no, this song is called Listen. She's like, it's not home. It's not living in the world as if it was home. It was like, listen, there's more of an action, less of a noun and more of a verb, right? The song is a very action orientated song. So yeah.
I just wanted to say, from a music kind of theory geek perspective, I just love how your phrase, like the three opening phrases, it's like
right.
It's a three phrase group, and I just love that, because we're so used to in music having two phrase groups, which is great too. But I just love the feeling of that breaking that, stretching that convention.
Yeah,
so
it breaks it up. I mean, and it actually reinforces the listen.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel like it was over with breathing. Listen to your cry. It needed to keep going. Listen for the stirring of the oceans. And again, repeating words for emphasis. Sometimes with poetry, you can, it was Sherry that talked about this a lot, where she says, anything you want emphasized, bring that word back in the next phrase. So listen for the stirring of the oceans. Again, it emphasizes the word stirring. So you're again, what are you trying to say? And for me, it was listen to the stirring of the breathing, of the cry, of the oceans, of the forest. It was that energy of the roaring, the stirring, that life force energy, and then the world is alive. Again, repeating, the world is alive. The world is alive. Again, it's this idea, like, we live in a world that's alive, that's moving, and there's a little bit of, I think, for me, just what's going on with climate change and how we become disconnected to nature in a lot of ways, disconnected to our bodies. So this is sort of like, we need to reconnect to these very simple things that are going to, help us move forward, I think. So there was a lot packed into this little poem.
Yeah.
A lot.
Beautiful.
So yeah. And then, and then getting back into the 3/4 at the end here. This is also a 3-bar phrase here.
Mm-hmm.
And that felt really like I wanted to do. And again, and this is a wrong chord actually on this chart. Oh, boo. These are wrong chords. But anyway, it doesn't do that. So, but yeah, it actually goes up. The melody goes up. Okay, so should we have a quick little listen? Maybe just
please.
The head.
Let's listen.
Okay. So let's see if I can get it happening here. I think I have it. Music. Listen. Okay. Oops. How come I can't get it up here? Sorry, friends.
I'm wondering if anyone has any questions
there it is.
for
There we
later.
go.
I can manage the chat.
So here we go. I'm going to press play.
Listen, listen, listen to the river. Listen, listen, listen to the wind. Listen, listen, listen for the whispers of the morning. The wondrous day begins. The world is alive, hear it calling. World is alive, rain is falling. World is alive, day is dawning. Living in this world as if it were home.
You notice here where I just leave this open for Steve, who played tenor saxophone, Steve Caldestat, to fill. And then I asked him to respond in here.
Listen, listen, listen to your cry. Listen, listen, listen for the stirring of the oceans, the forest and the sky. The world is alive, hear it calling. World is
Notice too,
alive,
the harmonic movement happens in the space, the faster chord progression. So it's one chord per bar, except the end of the phrase, the rhythm section creates the motion. These are wrong chords at 96. Sorry about that. Here comes the flying off this. Here she goes. She's gonna fly. There's the flying. She heads off into the stratosphere. And yeah, and into solo. So I'll just stop it there. I'm gonna stop the share and
So good.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
So yeah, so that's sort of how that all emerged. So for me, the process was the poem came first. Then I sat at a piano and kind of came up with a melody that as if I was speaking the poem. And then that rhythm, the rhythm for the song and like the the meter came out of what made sense for just if I were to speak those words. And yeah, and so that's sort of how the process for that tune went. And then yeah, editing some of the lyric and pulling certain words out and yeah. So, but it's very diatonic, except when it's not. And the thing that I think, Amanda, you do too, which I love, is, you know, there's this idea of like, it has to be really dense and complicated for it to be jazz. And I love bridging, like there's chords that are richer, like, you know, your major 7 sharp 9 or something like, but then I'll have like a triad with a third in the bass. So there's this. To the A minor 11, right? Which is just a 5, kind of coming from Bach, you know? It's like very beautiful voice leading, triadic voice leading stuff. And I love mirroring those two things together. So it's sort of like it goes from dark to like more opaque to denser to more, there's like almost like breath in the harmony when you do that. And also you get into some really neat bass motion stuff when you start thinking in those terms. A lot of my tunes kind of do that. I mean, it comes from years of playing, you know, I played hymns in church, you know, chorale music. It's like, it just, that stuff makes sense to me. So yeah. Oh my gosh, it's 12:15.
Yes. Oh my gosh, we can really, man, we can just talk,
keep
talk,
going.
talk, and it's so much great
I know.
ideas. Thank you for sharing all that, Jodi. I connect with all of that.
Yeah. So
well,
I
this
guess
was fun.
we should wrap up. Yeah.
We should, and you know, if anyone listening enjoyed that, and you're looking for some more of us, we're doing a workshop on Sunday next week, all about composition, and we're going to have some really helpful templates and ideas for getting started. And so please join us if you're free, and otherwise we'll see you at the next live stream.
We'll
see you then. Thank you so much.
Happy
for
Easter,
tuning in.
everyone. Have a beautiful,
Yes.
beautiful weekend, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.